Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the one-shot adventure, The Girl Who Woke the Dead, designed by Tal Aviezer for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping, supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Full disclosure, Tal Aviezer is a longtime patron subscriber, and his previous adventure, which was Secrets of the Blind Palace, is still one of my favorite adventures on the DM's Guild personally. It's an absolutely brilliant Halloween one-shot, and we ran it as a live-streamed Halloween one-shot adventure, so I'd still recommend that adventure. This one is not as involved. It's even hard to compare them because this one is there's no dungeon crawl, there's no big bad villain, there's no really big like mysterious story to uncover. Instead, it's basically, it takes a relatively simple escort mission and turns it into something very memorable and intriguing, and really asks some important, really philosophical questions of your players. I was actually very impressed with the directions and events that transpire during this quest. It is extremely easy to run. It is for 3rd level parties, although it can, as it says on the box, scale pretty much anywhere in tier 1. And essentially, the backstory is a young woman named Vitae, is a amnesic celestial, has been dropped onto the material plane for whatever reason, we don't know, and the designer never tells us. And she has the stats of a commoner, except she has increased hit points, which is important for an escort mission. And more importantly, she has the ability to raise the dead once per day, just straight up, which typically most people can't do. Only like high level clerics are able to perform that feat. And what's interesting is that instantly paints a target on her back because she's kind of naive about it, and she just throws that power around to everybody who needs it. And obviously that makes a lot of parties sit up and take notice, and that's where the players come in. So it's a very intriguing concept, and the entire adventure is basically the players protecting this NPC from all these threats that would threaten to exploit or destroy her, or otherwise just try to maybe, hire her or tell her, hey, maybe you shouldn't just raise everything you come across. I mean, it just asks some really interesting questions here. The entire thing takes place at Old Owlwell, which those of you that have played Lost Mine of Fendelver should recognize this area as being kind of one of the side quests in that adventure. You can obviously choose to use this area or not. It really kind of doesn't matter that much. It uses Phandalin a little bit in terms of that's one of the adventure hooks, is one of the characters, one of the NPCs from Phandalin can say, hey, this nice woman has these, and people, or believe she's like a prophet or something, like, hey, she raised my, son who was trampled, and, but she's since fled to basically these ruins to try to camp out here and avoid, any unwanted attention. But of course, attention has come to her. We do get full color maps for the Old Owlwell, but as I said, it's really highly adaptable. You can move this adventure wherever you want. It's very short. It's only about 14 pages, but I really kind of enjoyed the way it's put together. Now, as you can see, we don't get a very good layout, which I recall was the same with Secrets of the Blind Palace. It's really kind of getting inexcusable at this point why we can't, because those templates exist. They're out there. They're relatively easy to acquire and be able to plug in. So I would prefer at least the bare minimum attention being paid to the layout of the adventures, but the content here is really solid. And essentially, the players are given a couple different adventure hooks. Either, as I mentioned, they can be in Phandalin, which means, hey, you can run this as a pretty effective side quest in Lost Mine of Fendelver if you wanted to. It's a very self-contained story and perfect for Tier 1. Or maybe the players knew someone, or maybe one of them died, and so they're bringing a body to this person they heard can, revive people. Or maybe somebody in the party is part of a church or faction who has heard about this possible prophet/heretic that they need to check up on and make sure that this is a really, it's like the priests go out and check on like miracles and stuff to like make sure it's the real deal. You could, turn all of that. So it has a lot of interesting ideas for adventure hooks. And I appreciate, these are bullet points, but as you can see, it's half a page here in terms of getting the players interested in this plot line. And there's a lot of interest here. So in the first part, they basically just meet this character, Vitae. She's got ideals, bonds, and flaws. She is, she has this great gift, but she doesn't know really who she is or where she came from. She can speak Celestial, which is interesting if players try to converse her like that, but she doesn't know why. And what's fascinating is the designer doesn't try to explain that at all. As you can see, the adventure background's only like a single paragraph. There's no big mystery to uncover. There's no, oh, she's the child of so-and-so, and then she's here because of this reason. You, as a DM, you could maybe concoct these things if you wanted to turn into a bigger campaign, but otherwise, this is just a basically one-off side quest. Pretty much, you could do it as a one-shot adventure. And who she is, it's almost a MacGuffin, which is kind of a bummer because it does feel like she maybe doesn't have a whole lot of agency because it's the players who really come in and kind of make these decisions for her. Although I guess as a DM, it's up to you to decide, how much say she has in these things. But it seems like from the, from what I've read, it's really, she is looking at the players and be like, what should I do here? Which, you always want to involve your players in these choices. And I like that they have meaningful choices and consequences to make. But I do feel like her being the central NPC, she doesn't have a whole lot going on and kind of turns into almost this, physical MacGuffin that, her backstory isn't really relevant. It's just what's going on in the moment that actually matters. And what's going on is a series of events where basically different parties and factions come to pay a visit. It's almost like Canterbury Tales where, all the different people are coming along the road. The first event, and so the players, she refuses to move away. She's got a dead body of a child who she has promised to raise as her next, people have like a waiting list, I guess, at this point, because she can only do it once per day. And mechanically it says, she can do it once per day and she needs to wait. She's already done it once that day. She needs to wait till the next, I guess sunset is when it says that, or maybe sun, I don't know, whatever, the time frame to where they basically have to watch her for a 24-hour period until she's able to raise this child. And then that's when a series of events happen. So the first event is a group of cultists just come and try to kill her, which is pretty straightforward. There's no real talking to her, although I will say instead of just having these enemies just sneak up and attack, there's an interesting little twist where one of the cultists like approaches from afar and talks to the players and has a dialogue sequence while the others are trying to sneak up on the tower and attack. I thought that was really cool and add some flavor to the cult. Otherwise, it is pretty much designed to be a straightforward fight with cultists / cult fanatics. The next day, a priest of Joaquin shows up, and this character is amazing. His name is Alton Big Barrel, and it says he's a master salesman. He makes, he has the ability to make whomever he is speaking with feel very special. It reminds me of like a game show host, where he shows up and basically is offering to pay Vitae a huge amount of sum to exclusively work for them as their, basically bona fide faith healer or whatever. It's a very funny scene. It's meant to be played up as comedic. He seems like a very fun character. He's got a shield guardian named Ralphus, who is like broadcasting, I guess through magical means, through the audience, and you can hear them cheering and stuff through his faceplate. I thought that was absolutely incredible. And ultimately, the players, if they wanted to, could convince her to like, hey, go, and he'll like throw out money, like he'll pay the players, like, hey, thanks for keeping her safe, and hire her for a big sum. What's interesting is this whole time there's no real right or wrong answer, and the designer, which I think is refreshing to me, isn't really trying to guide the players into any one particular outcome. Instead, basically he's created this NPC and a series of events and saying, okay, players, how do you handle each of these events? And at any time you could basically sell her out to any of these different facts, or I guess the first one would be like she gets murdered. That would be that one. You could back up, let her die. And that's how it ends. Now, on the flip side, there's not really a good ending, which is unfortunate. We'll get to that in a second. But I appreciate that all of these have their own little, branching, not really branching paths. It doesn't create like a bunch of eventualities. It's just like that's the end. It's like choose your own adventure books where each one of these can be like, all right, flip to this page, and then the story is over because, she accepted the position here and can go on. Assuming she doesn't. And by the way, there's a little scene where he can actually sell magic items to the players, and they are not meant to get a long rest between these encounters, by the way. They're supposed to only get short rests, which I think is an important point, because, it's a one-shot. You shouldn't have to long rest in the middle there anyway. The next day, this is when things get really interesting. A bunch of Knights of Torm show up, and they've got a prisoner in shackles, and they show up and say, hey, we hung this guy. He's a convicted criminal. We hung him and sentenced him to death. And all of a sudden, we found him alive, and he claimed a woman with your description and your whereabouts, raised him from the dead. What's up with that? And she will admit to doing it because she does not discriminate between, what circumstances people died in or what their past was or anything. She just raises people as she sees them, just gives it out. And that adds a lot of interesting moral problems because then they're like, well, you can't fucking do that. Like, we're going to arrest you for essentially aiding and abetting a criminal. And that's a really interesting social scene for players to deal with. And it's written that way, too, where players can have, ultimately a very interesting dialogue sequence. It gets even more interesting because she kind of argues, this is the one time she has a little bit of agency, with the other knights, who basically claim that, like, look, we can't just throw around resurrections to everybody. That upsets our entire balance and economy. Like, we, expect people to be able to pay for that, and that funds a lot of what we do. And she's like, well, that means only rich people can get raised from the dead. Like, it should be, healthcare should be a human right. And yes, I am getting the allegory there for the U.S. Healthcare system. But they had points where it's like, hey, this funds like our orphanages and our, ability to hire and pay paladins who keep the peace in the area. It's an interesting back and forth. There's no real necessarily right or wrong answer right here, which I think is a really interesting debate to introduce to your players. And ultimately, it probably will lead to a combat encounter, but depending on how the players treat these paladins and veterans and priests, whatever they are, they could use non-lethal attacks, which is a pretty cool way of doing it, I think, is they're trying to, arrest a prisoner and you're, aiding and abetting, but we'll just knock you out instead of, going for blows, unless, of course, the party wants to try to kill them. And it could be a big combat encounter, or the players could just, again, allow her to be arrested and then away she goes. So that's one encounter. There's even a scene where during this fight, the Priest of Joaquin shows up again and says, hey, take my offer. It's gone down a little bit now because it's a buyer's market. But, I will let my shield guardian help you all in this fight if you accept, my position here. I thought that was pretty cool to have him come back. And then the final encounter, assuming we've gotten all that way and we still refused all these people and we're still trying to just keep her independent, is a bunch of monks of Kelemvor show up. Kelemvor. And this is when it gets really even more interesting because they show up with a dead deer and you expect, okay, what are they going to raise her and talk about animals and stuff? And instead they just leave the dead deer on the ground and just step back. And there's not a whole big dialogue sequence. They're just like, hey, just, hear us out. We have a point we want to make about how death is important. And sure enough, like, different animals will come and feed on this carcass, like foxes and crows and all this stuff. And like, and the point they're making is like, hey, death feeds, other parts of nature. It's a natural part of the life cycle. Like, you can't just go around resurrecting everybody, which is another excellent point to make. And I thought that was like, wow, this is really going in some very deep places for a one-shot D&D adventure in which, the title makes it sound like this is just some kind of, horror story again. And that's really the entire point of it. Like, the players can once again, and they invite her to go to their sacred sanctuary where it's like, hey, we can just talk about, death and the importance there, and none of these other factions will be allowed in. It's a safe place. And it's kind of, I guess, the most right answer. But the problem I have is if the players refuse all these different factions, and if they finally refuse this one, in which, and again, she's not partial to any of them necessarily. I mean, obviously, some of them want to kill her or arrest her. But if the players still refuse and she refuses all these factions, there's no ending after that. Like, she just, the next day she'll resurrect that child, and then it just ends. Like, it just mentions the fact that she will bring she wants the players to bring the child back to Phandalin. But what does she do? Does she just stay here and then presumably meet with more, problems along the way because people know where she are? Does she just become a wandering pilgrim at that point? One of my concerns would be, what if the players are smart enough to say, hey, join our party because we could use an NPC that can fucking raise the dead once per day. That's really game-breakingly powerful. In which case, the designer doesn't seem to acknowledge that as any kind of contingency plan. Like, what if the next day, like, she just disappears and that was just a day, a 24-hour or however long she was. I think she was supposed to be there for a couple months or something. Maybe it was like a test for everybody to see how it would handle. Like, I don't know. There's just none of those epilogue sequences there. So it just kind of ends a little bit abruptly to where I feel like there should have been another page or at least a few other paragraphs of, optional ways for it to end, assuming the players have rejected all these other offers. But honestly, for such a short, relatively simple idea where it literally takes place in one area with one singular NPC, and obviously it involves other, humanoid NPC stat blocks, but I was really impressed with what it does with such a simple amount of ideas and tools. Not simple like I'm degrading it or anything, but just, there's not, like I said, there's not a big dungeon crawl. It's not like a multi-step process. We're not investigating anything. It's just You show up, there's an NPC with an exclamation above their head, you go up and talk to them, and you realize we need to protect this person for 24 hours as other things come and happen to us in a pretty, linear fashion. But they're all just such cool ideas, and there's a nice variety. I mean, it's got the social thing, it's got the role-playing thing. I guess we're not really exploring too much because there's no, investigation or dungeon crawl here, but for being a straightforward concept that's easy to run and easily adaptable into any campaign, I was very impressed with what this brings to the table. Let's go over my pros and cons for The Girl Who Woke the Dead. Pros: a pivotal NPC and a morally complex series of choices and events. This is such a cool idea for a simple adventure hook. It's just, what if there was this random commoner who could raise the dead, and then all these people are interested in exploiting that, and then how do the players deal with that and ultimately choose maybe her future path? Pro: it is easily dropped into any adventure or campaign, especially Lost Mine at Fendover. Obviously, it takes place at Old Owl Well. It references Phandalin. That would be the easiest way to go. But because it could be in any location and involves such, generic cults and stuff, like it's very, again, I'm not saying that like it's bad. I'm saying it is a positive in my book. Like, you could easily throw this in as a side quest, and players could just stumble on this character, or they could hear about it from other people. But I think that's a huge plus for any kind of relatively short adventure. Pro: APL adjustments for combat encounters, designed for level 3, but you could easily scale it from maybe not first level, but probably second, third, fourth level pretty easily. And Pro: meaningful player choices and branching outcomes. Essentially, every single one of the scenes could cause the adventure to end because this NPC needs to be alive, it needs to be independent for you to make it all the way to the end. So I thought that was a really cool plan, is that it's so open-ended in terms of how, ultimately what is her path. On the con side of things, it doesn't have a proper epilogue if you reject all of these paths. It just doesn't. It doesn't say, like, does she just hang out here? Does she go with the party? Does she disappear? Like, what happens? It's kind of an abrupt ending, so I would have liked to see a little more information there. And the other con is the plain white layout. Just really feels kind of inexcusable this late in the DM's Guild life cycle. Like, at least give me the basic, bare bones, like sepia tone, classic. Which looks like a professional product. I think it just kind of takes away, which is unfortunate because this is a very good product, and I think the layout should reflect that. If I'm being honest, I'm also not a fan of the cover art used here. Not that the art is bad, but it's too abstract. It doesn't really, tell anything about what's going on in the adventure, and it's a little too busy. You can barely even see the title on there, so I thought that was a little bit of a misstep there. Final verdict: The Girl Who Woke the Dead transforms a relatively simple escort mission into an intriguing and highly adaptable one-shot adventure. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures, in fact, here on my YouTube channel, and support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Wizard, Princess, Christopher, Thomas, Captain Mike, Adam, Aiden, Stan, Nathan, Alex, Chad, Alexander, and Dan. And gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Ross, Lippy Spuds, Jerome, Sklenia, Nick, Farty, McButterpants, Blood, Angel, Veronis, Baboon, Nate, and Fast Like a Tortoise. Thank you all very much for your support.